Ja, ich freue mich sehr, dass ich Sie hier zu begrüßen kann. Unsere Institutskolloquiumsreihe hat zwei große Schwerpunkte in diesem Wintersemester. Zum einen geht es im breitesten Sinne um Fragen der ethischen Reflexion auf neue wissenschaftliche Prozesse und Veränderungen, die auch langfristige Auswirkungen auf das Wissenschaftssystem haben. Und zum anderen ist ein großer Schwerpunkt in unserer Kolloquiumsreihe der Fokus auf das Thema Zeitlichkeit und Normativität, das mit der Forschergruppe hier am Institut zusammenhängt. I'm now switching to English because the whole session, at least the presentation session, will be in English. And it's a really great pleasure for me to introduce my dear colleague, Barbarta Prainsack. Barbara, I was just asking myself when we met the first time, I think I can say it's almost 10 years ago.
I think longer, Silke.
It's really
even longer.
Yeah. And I have to say, for me, it's not only a personal, but also really an academic pleasure to have you here in our colloquium for two reasons. The first of all is because I really admire your work. I think you are one of the most productive, let's say, bioethicists in the broader sense, scientists, scholars I personally know, because the work you do is so broad and also always shows such a depth. And I think this is really a really impressive combination that I think not so many in our field can cover. Please allow me to introduce to you Barbarta Prainsack and also a bit her background, which is so long and so impressive. I can only spot on a few things. So first of all, currently she is invited scholar at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Berlin. But normally she holds a position as professor for comparative policy analysis at the University of Vienna at the Department of Political Science. Before she was 5 years professor at the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at the King's College in London. And then she had many other important positions and also shows a broad academic career, always bridging the gap between political science on the one hand, and bioethics on the other, which I think is really a very enriching combination. Additional to her really proliferative work, she is also very active in science policies. Here, I just want to mention two of her really many positions. I think the very important one since last year is that she's chair of the European Group on Ethics and New Technologies, who is one of the really important advisory boards to the European Commission and who handles a lot of important topics, like, for example, the topic you will talk today to us, namely artificial intelligence. And she is also, since many years, member of the Austrian Bioethics Commission, just to name those two important ones. Also, your publication spectrum and oeuvre is really impressive. I cannot go through all the many publications, so please allow me just to focus again on some more recent books. I think you are really also influential to the current debates, especially within Europe, but also beyond, with regard to your work on solidarity and how solidarity has become a really important and somehow new emerging topic within bioethics. You have worked many years on personalized medicine, and you have contributed to this debate, particularly from a political science debate and issues of what does it means for particular communities like patient organizations, patient communities, but also how to overcome, so to say, too narrow focus only on the individualized focus in medicine. And you have, and that's what you currently also are working on, is on more general questions about solidarity, not only within the healthcare system, but in general regarding societal transformation processes, working conditions. And so this also shows again how broad and how impressive your work is. So these are just my few framing words. And so I'm really happy now to hand over to Barbara. She will have a chance to talk to us around 45 minutes. We just discussed in advance. If you have any questions or comments, you can already put them in the chat and we collect that, and then that can be already used for the discussion afterwards. So Barbara, you want to share with us your PowerPoint?
Yes.
Looking forward.
Thank you, Silke. I hope that I can share more. But first of all, thank you so much for your very, very kind and generous introduction. And it really means a lot coming from you, because the admiration is mutual. And I'm very honored that I can give the first talk today. I'm also a bit nervous about it, because I know that there's so much knowledge about artificial intelligence and the ethics of AI in this room. And I'm not an AI ethicist. I'm a sort of policy and social science observer of the debate, and someone who had to say things on the topic, also in my role of as a member of the EGE and then the chair. So it's a topic that, in a way, one could argue we should all participate in. But please do see my talk not as an attempt to present a polished paper or to present to you what I figured out, but it's a contribution to a debate and a kind of hypothesis of how we should frame certain things, and maybe also what we should do and what we shouldn't do to some extent. So, but please see it with that caveat. And normally, I would say please interrupt whenever you feel you want to interrupt, which we won't do today because the talk is being recorded. But please be as critical as you need be. I'm going to start the timer now so that I don't talk for too long. What I want to do today is to first address the question of why the ethics of artificial intelligence is blossoming at the moment, or even booming. Some people talk about an ethics bubble even around artificial intelligence. And I think there are two ways to answer this question. After I've done that, I will present what I think are three ways out of this ethics bubble. So 3 ways in which we can guide our research and our thinking, our discussions, to have a productive political discussion on the ethics of AI. Political, not in a kind of partisan way, but as political in the sense that it concerns the way we organize our society, and it concerns also how we organize our political economy, which is probably one of my key messages that I will try to convey today. Starting with why everyone talks about AI ethics. Of course, I can't do that without first defining how I use the term AI in this context. Again, this is not meant to be prescriptive. Obviously, I'm not going to tell anyone how AI should be understood, but I think it's important when we use the term that we do. So I am using the European Commission's understanding of artificial intelligence as something that refers to systems that display intelligent behavior by analyzing the environment and taking actions. I personally would put intelligent behavior in inverted commas, because this is of course a way of anthropomorphizing a machine agency. But nevertheless, this is more or less the remit of how I would how I understand AI when I talk about it now. So why is it that there is so much talk about artificial intelligence the ethics of artificial intelligence at the moment. And here, I'm sure you have all seen this map, I think the Berkman-Klein Center map on principled artificial intelligence, because there are, of course, other ways of thinking ethics of artificial intelligence. This map of principled artificial intelligence shows the immense width of the contributions to the debate. A lot of research institutes, a lot of research papers, but also NGOs, even public bodies, most notoriously probably the former high-level Commission on Artificial Intelligence of the European Commission, insofar as it pertains to Europe. So a lot of different bodies have issued guidance on AI ethics. And what I find particularly helpful here on this map is that these authors have actually looked at which the most frequently referred to and frequently highlighted principles were. And you can see, if it's too small for you to read, it's privacy, accountability, safety and security, transparency, fairness and non-discrimination, human control over technology, professional responsibility, and promotion of human values. And we can see two things right away. We can say that such a principled approach will of course be prone to any kind of critique and issues with implementation, that any principled approach and any principle-based guidelines will be susceptible to, which does not diminish the value of the intellectual exercise. But when it comes to actually having an effect in practice, this is inevitably a problem. And I think the combination of the values shows that this is almost a perfect merger of principles coming from medical ethics and principles coming from computer and data ethics. Data ethics less, but the FAT paradigm, fairness, accountability, and transparency, I'll get back to that later. That is represented here, and some medical ethics principles, of course, as well. Especially if one argues that some of the values here are manifestations of autonomy and of human autonomy. I also find this infographic very interesting because it really shows how much has happened in the last 5 years. So the timeline here starts in 2016. I don't need to say much about this. It's self-explanatory. There are many different sets of principles coming from, which is also very helpful here on this graph, coming from the private sector. So the pink stripes are the private sector publications, some intergovernmental organizations, quite a few only, actually, and a lot of green ones denoting government. So it's mostly government and the private sector here. So I'm getting to the first question, to the answer that I posed myself. Why is there so much attention to AI ethics? And of course, an obvious answer, and I suppose that many of you have thought this already. What is she talking about? Obviously, there's a lot of development. I was in a panel debate yesterday with an informatics practitioner, a professor of informatics, who said, well, this is all new, this is all not new, this is all sort of old stuff. Maybe now we have more computing power. Now this is all developing a bit faster, but there's nothing of that is radically new. But I think we need to really keep in mind that for regular citizens, some developments that include AI that have become technologies of the everyday. Maybe the most recent wave was generative in AI in the form of ChatGPT in this part of the world. That has really brought artificial intelligence to people's lives in a way that has fueled the debate in a different way than before. And we all know issues when we work empirically with wider groups, with the general population, the so-called general population. It's very, very difficult to have discussions about hypothetical problems. And there are many colleagues who doubt the value of doing this kind of empirical work at all. I think when it comes to artificial intelligence, many of the people who are now engaging have those more recent technologies in mind, which on the one hand, we need to keep in mind when we try to understand why the debate is shaped as it is shaped. But also overall, my first answer is the kind of answer. Of course, there's much more artificial intelligence penetrating deeper in a visible way into people's lives. Obviously, there is now more debate. And of course, Elon Musk, I have to quote it because he's unfortunately so important to the debate when he says that humankind will be destroyed, and that is taken very, very seriously by people. So the first answer is there is a lot of discussion on AI ethics because technological development has accelerated, and because the breadth of the technologies have penetrated into virtually all aspects of our lives. That's answer number one. So answer number one is a good answer, positive answer. Thankfully, we have ethicists who do look into this, given that there are new challenges that need to be solved. But of course, there's also a dark answer. I would call it a less sanguine answer. And that other answer is that, and I think both are true, by the way. I'm not saying that only the second one is true, but the second one is not heard so often. The second answer is that there are a number of corporations, tech companies that have a very strong interest in keeping the ethics in AI, and I would also say ethics in big data. I actually think I will get to this point later on, but I don't think it makes sense talking about AI without simultaneously talking about big data approaches. But there are companies that have a strong interest in supporting and funding an ethics in AI debate. And there are some older examples, because this is not very, very recent. It started at the end of the last decade with, you know this as well as I do, even better, with technology corporations funding chairs, funding positions, funding whole institutes, putting up independent ethics experts from universities in their own company ethics boards, and so on and so on. So why do they do this? Also here, I do not exclude, of course, that part of it is genuine interest in doing the right thing and also avoiding reputational damage, obviously. There's also, and there's some good empirical evidence there, there's also partly the goal of playing out ethics against regulation. This was very, very visible in the high-level expert group on ethics and AI. It was very, very clear. I'll show a slide about that. I think the composition of the group also showed that the goal of that committee was to send the message that if we get ethics right, then we don't need regulation. So we don't need binding norms if we have ethics rules, and of course the companies will self-regulate and will hold each other accountable. Because, so I'm now repeating that narrative, this is not what I'm saying, but the narrative continues in the sense that ethics is better to kind of govern this rapidly growing field of artificial intelligence, because binding laws are inert, they stifle innovation, and we, whoever we is, will lag behind China. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what the argument is. And I think this argument is hugely problematic for reasons that I don't need to explain to you, in the sense that, of course, we can't play out ethics against regulation. The two are intertwined. They need each other. one without the other is empty at best and problematic at worst. But also because this whole innovation narrative and regulation and also ethics, I mean, this actually is also sometimes used as an argument against overzealous ethics, as they call it. Ethics stifling innovation. This kind of accusation is problematic also because innovation is not something that has benefited people tremendously in the last decades. Colleagues of mine, such as Keen Birch, have carried out very, very good empirical research showing that a lot of innovation in this field recently has supported rent-seeking practices. So it has benefited those who profit on intellectual property protection, patents, and other kinds of copyright, intellectual property protections, rather than creating value in the real economy. So again, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying innovation is bad and all innovation benefits only a couple of corporations, but I think we need to look very, very closely when somebody argues that regulation or ethics stifle innovation, what innovation we're talking about and who that particular innovation benefits. Is it something that creates something in the real world, or is it mostly intellectual property or financial products? So I've already highlighted the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence as a particularly, I would say, unfortunate instance of how, but also a very telling instance of how ethics was pitted against regulation. I know that some members of this committee were very critical of that, so please don't take my criticism of all the members, but as an endeavor. So these are the prints or the recommendations that they made, which I think, I'm not going to read them individually, but it shows very, very clearly where the focus lies. Securing a single European market, fostering the data economy, stimulating open and lucrative investment, or an environment for lucrative investment, which is absolutely fine if you have a business consultant recommending that. I'm not even against the individual recommendations, most of them at least, but to have this as an outcome of an ethics group, I think speaks a very, very clear language. Also, for those of you who want to look into this more deeply, and if you don't already know this, look at the composition of the group. Also, I was an observer at the time because I was sent from the EGE as an observer to this group, and I couldn't participate in a single meeting because the timelines were so that academics couldn't realistically make them. So I was told that some of the meetings were, if not most of the meetings, were dominated by people who could make it, who had different time scales, different resources. But the one thing that I can vouch for is that the timelines were very short. So there were all kinds of interesting structures in place to ensure that a particular outcome would come out of this at the end. So I've now given two answers to this question of why AI ethics is so salient, so such a hot issue at the moment. So my first answer was because obviously there's a lot of development that needs to be assessed ethically. My second answer was the less sanguine, more cynical one, saying that there's a corporate interest also in a particular kind of AI ethics debate that doesn't rock the boat too much for those who want to develop technologies. And then there's, of course, also this interesting research coming on top of all of this by colleagues such as Luc Mann, this is only one of them, who have looked at especially, but not only, principled ethics guidelines and found that they are entirely ineffective. So I'm not very surprised. I don't, and maybe this is something that we can go into in the discussion. I still don't think that this is useless. I don't think the only purpose of ethics guidelines is to be effective in practice. So one could argue that there's a value in just having a discussion on what we consider important, which principles we consider more important than others, and so on. But at the end of the day, if we want to ensure that we have democratic control over technology development, which I will get back to later on in my talk, and if we want to ensure that AI is used developed in an ethical manner, we need to be able to do something in practice. So I would say that being effective in practice is not all that ethics guidelines need to do, but it's definitely something that they need to do among other things. So it is a problem if this relatively preliminary research, preliminary also because of the time span, if that is corroborated in the future, that those ethics principles are useless, then I think we have a problem. Also, just to show you a few more things about what other colleagues have said about this phenomenon, so not to claim that I'm the only or the first one who came up with this critique. I think this was even on the day that the high-level group's statement was published. Immediately people used the term ethics washing. I am conscious of the critique of the term ethics washing. I'm conscious and I agree to some extent with the concern that if we use ethics washing, we are giving ethics a bad name. So I use it in inverted commas, and I don't necessarily use it in my own work. But what people meant here with ethics washing, however it's called, I think is unfortunately quite accurate as critique. So the fantastic Karen Young, who has written a lot about this, argued, and she was also actually on the committee, she was one of the critical members. She said, industry self-regulation is the predominant approach for bringing about ethical AI. That was her observation. So this pitting regulation, self-regulation actually, against binding norms, and ethics should help self-regulation. Also, Karen Young said, protest from industry that regulation stifles innovation assumes that innovation is an unvarnished and unmitigated good. I referred to Keen Birch earlier, who showed that empirically, that innovation very often has functioned in the last 2 decades at least to increase social and economic inequalities, and not to foster and support the common good. So an important point that also Karen Young and others are making is that ethics alone, in the way that I've sort of singled out the high-level group, but there are many more examples of that particular debate. If we see ethics as something that is not immediately tied to policy instruments, and where it needs to be also to legal norms, then it really lacks the necessary tool to enforce its own normative claims. I think Karen Young put it very well in this very succinct sentence. AI ethics lacks necessary tools. It's toothless if it's not tied to policy instruments. I'm not saying that every set of guidelines needs to also provide a full set of policy instruments, but somewhere in that trajectory, it needs to be done. Last but not least, Thilo Hagendorf, also a very interesting critique of what is going on. Science or industry-led ethics guidelines, as well as other concepts of self-governance, may serve to pretend that our accountability can go from state authorities and democratic institutions to the corporate sector. And for those of us who have observed the recent AI summits in the United Kingdom, this is exactly what we saw. Actually, it was worse. I encourage you to watch this interview by Rishi Sunak of Elon Musk, if you haven't done so. I think there's nothing around that is more symbolic of the relationship between the state and private corporations in this field, where the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is outing himself as a fanboy of Elon Musk and more or less asking him for a job. So it's a painful interview, but I think it really describes how far we have come in not only losing democratic control over this technology, but also not even claiming it anymore. When I say we, I mean collectives, I mean the demos in our countries. We're not even claiming it anymore. We think that it's a really good idea if government bodies, public bodies rely on private services for public service provision. We think that it's okay that Elon Musk can interfere in violent conflicts with his satellites. And, this is a military technology that is under no democratic control. We think it's fine that the public space that Habermas wrote about, and it wasn't perfect in his days, but nowadays the public domain is structured by online platforms that operate according to for-profit principles. And here, for ethics to say, or even for regulation to say that, okay, we have to make it a little bit more ethical what goes on there, and we have to have more, we have to have better content moderation, and even antitrust to prevent undue market concentration. I think all of those mechanisms are ineffective as long as we don't really regain democratic control over what happens there. For digital platforms, it will have to be ownership, public ownership, or very, very strong public control, as long as digital platforms try to increase their commercial profits, which they legitimately do, the expressions of hate and racism and sexism and false information will continue to proliferate, because that's what gets the revenue up. So there's also a kind of strange alliance between public bodies and corporations here, where public bodies are in a way unwilling sometimes to solve the problems that they were tasked to solve with really, really effective tools. And where also regularly public bodies are looking into the same toolbox of instruments to solve the problems that they have created from that very same toolbox. So I think we really need new tools and instruments. I will get to that later on. So this kind of get to that later on, I will not speak for longer than 40 minutes. I have an eye on my time. So briefly, 3 ways out of this ethics bubble. By ethics bubble, I mean, I don't mean ethics as such, but that type of ethics that is shaped by corporate interests. And one is to not, and this is maybe the easiest one, to stay clear of the dystopic and utopian narratives that, I don't want to talk about Elon Musk all of the time, but people like him are circulating at the moment to show that they are really considerate individuals, that they are concerned about what goes on. But this type of agenda setting is problematic. This type of agenda setting is also demonstrated by lots of business consultancies that have, for the last couple of months, predicted, for example, that up to 300 million jobs will get lost on the basis of AI, due to AI. And first of all, if you look into those calculations, I think that the number of 300 million cannot be substantiated. And also, I think it is very clear that in a situation where in the global north, recruitment problems are more common than unemployment in many places, this fear of AI costing hundreds of millions of jobs also has the purpose of fueling the fear of unemployment, so that employees don't demand too much. So that's one of the functions that this debate has. And this is just to give a sort of random example of how how many researchers are following the lead given by the business corporations here. So this job losses due to AI doesn't come only, I'm not claiming that it comes only from these, the interest in the topic doesn't come only from press releases of business corporations that predict those job losses. They come from other places as well, and there are real job losses in manufacturing, for example. But the way that the debate is shaped is very much shaped and I would say determined even by a certain number of corporate actors. And if you don't need to just believe what I say, you can look for yourself. We did an analysis with two of my colleagues in my research group where we hand-coded, we didn't use AI, we hand-coded hundreds and hundreds of policy papers that analyzed the problems of the future of work and suggested solutions. And what we found, in a nutshell, I'm overgeneralizing here for the sake of time, but it's all spelled out in the paper. What we found here, that a relatively narrow set of actors, prominently business consultancies, are telling a particular story. And we worked out in this paper what the premises are. So it's usually robots are stealing jobs and the solution is upskilling. And upskilling is individual upskilling, right? It's the responsibilities on individuals to remain competitive in the labor market. One could tell the story very differently. And then in the EGE, in the European Group of Ethics, we've done that in an opinion that has received no attention whatsoever. Probably because it told a very different story. It talked about societal upskilling. We said that the problem around the future of work was created by policies that have it made possible that productivity gains due to technology are not adequately shared with employees, that people who hold jobs, who haven't lost their jobs, can still not pay their bills. So that's the problem that we need to solve. And technology plays a role in this for the good and for the bad. But it's not that the robots are stealing the jobs and now we have to solve it. So these kinds of narratives are not just something to shrug off. I think they're really agenda setting in a very, very effective way. Of course, the utopian ones as well. The utopian narratives. No, sorry, I get to that later, to the slide that I wanted to show you. The utopian ones that artificial intelligence, for example, will solve the problem of labor shortages in healthcare. So, and I'm not going into this because you notice that why that can be part of a solution. I think there's definitely a place for AI in healthcare, definitely. Also, healthcare is very broad, but thinking that one can solve the recruitment problem in healthcare with AI, I think it's a fatal mistake that a lot of policymakers are making now. So what we need to do as people who are ethicists, social scientists, policy analysts, technology developers, I think what we need to do is to resist those agenda setting attempts. Often they are more than attempts, and to set our own agendas and really look at where it pays to pay attention now. What is important to look at now? What does technology do now? And not to say that future developments aren't and future scenarios aren't important, but there are a lot of tangible things that need to be solved now. One example, so this number 2 is only an example. The debate on replacing humans. I think rather than will machines replace humans? We had this debate on will they replace jobs? This debate has now moved on a little bit to will they replace tasks? Well, clearly machines will replace tasks, but then other tasks will come on our to-do lists. So, for example, to make this a bit more tangible, a radiologist who spent a lot of time eyeballing images doesn't do that in the same way anymore, but she uses artificial intelligence very extensively, if she's especially if she's in the rich world. But we haven't, we haven't decreased our need for radiologists. They just do different things now. So AI, and this is quite typical, AI shifts what people do. There are exemptions and exceptions. I've used manufacturing. There are jobs that get lost entirely due to AI, but most jobs change their nature and change the composition of tasks rather than being lost. And what we should discuss here, I think, is really what kind of humans control technology, and not do humans control technology, but also what kind of humans control technology, and who bears the price for the changes that artificial intelligence and other data-rich technologies are creating in our work lives. So what kind of inequities are being mitigated, maybe, but what kind of inequities are also created and exacerbated by this? One example is, of course, I've already mentioned it, the idea that artificial intelligence can solve the labor shortage in healthcare. There's a lot of work. I've just summarized what the analysis say. So AI can help with administration, scheduling, communication with patients, diagnostic support, tailored treatment plans, robotics, of course, not only in surgery, but also in care, to lift patients, for example, to lift people in need of care, and resource management. So, and that is an example of where artificial intelligence will save some of the need for humans at the moment, but it might also create more need for human labor, because when it comes to healthcare, we know that that human contact as such is important for some patients, and that removing this human contact will create costs in its own right that we cannot, that we haven't calculated. They are not part of most calculations. And then there's, of course, also the very old famous paper by Lisanne Bainbridge. The first iteration is actually from the 80s, The Ironies of Automation, where she argued on the occasion of automation, not artificial intelligence yet, obviously, that wherever one automates to save human labor, one needs more human labor. Because the slide summarizes it. There are always scenarios that cannot be automated. There's always the need of, almost always, as long as it's really a repetitive and entirely a predictable task and the machine works perfectly, you always need a human to supervise and correct for the machine. So think of the self-checkout counters in supermarkets. You need a person there who compensates for all of the things that couldn't be calculated into the system. So I think the supermarket checkout is actually a good example for this development. At first, it's introduced to save, for companies to save on human labor. Then it turns out that you need a person standing there. And then maybe some people think maybe we need human beings in supermarkets to do other things, to help people shop, to help our aging population with reading, with reaching things, and so on and so on. And some moves online, so you need more people in delivery. So that's how it works. So the challenge, that's my key point here, the challenge that artificial intelligence creates goes far beyond what kind of tasks will be replaced, and is this a problem? It really goes to the heart of how does it affect the distribution of power and agency in our societies and across our societies. And here I will do a quick shout out to Peter Dietschy's Four Phases of Power, which is a classic in my field. I don't know to what extent it's known in your fields, but Dietschy really drew attention to, you don't need to read through that slide. He drew attention to the fact that power manifests in more than one way. But the first phase of power was for a long time the only phase that people saw. it was this kind of conflictual power. I'm demanding that you give me money or else. For a long time, this was the only thing that people saw. But power also consists of preventing people from doing something that they want to do. Power also manifests itself in manipulation, which is a massive issue nowadays in public spaces and media. And then the fourth phase of power, where people have internalized norms and apply to themselves. These are, I think, issues that need to be solved now, and I think we need ethicists to look at them. So the first is, we won't remember this, most of us, in 1949 when the housewife was lured to, or that maybe her husband, as the breadwinner in those days, was lured to buying a washing machine so that the housewife in those days could sit in the chair and rest. And this hasn't happened, as we all know. And the same happened in almost every other job, that the productivity gains from technology use did not benefit the worker. Mostly not. Mostly the workers got many, many other tasks that is more onerous than what she previously did. This is known in the literature as the intensification of work. The other issue that we really need to solve now is workplace surveillance. So workplace surveillance in the era of working from home, COVID has moved from, as an issue, this has moved from delivery workers to office workers all around the world. So the last point I will not unpack anymore because I won't have time. I thought I would be a bit faster than I actually was, but I will just present the key idea and then come to my conclusions, because I'm almost at the end of my time. So I've said in the beginning of my talk that good AI ethics should start with good data ethics. I think data ethics needs to be a part of AI ethics, always. This also means that we need to go beyond the FAT paradigm, although the FAT paradigm is already an advancement from people who applied medical ethics principles to AI. That didn't really work. It didn't really work because of this, because the data body is not the physical body. The data body is not bounded. The data bodies can be, so my digital doubles can be in several places at the same time. So we need instruments and also principles that accommodate the nature of data bodies. So the FAT paradigm was already an advancement to the application of principles for medical ethics on AI, which also happened. And finally, I'm now getting to the slide that I wanted to show you. Finally, the way that we are trying to solve this, to put our money where our mouth is, we published a white paper that contains a lot of policy instruments for each of the three pillars. So we're still working on this, but we have published a white paper that really shows how we can make data use easier where it creates significant public value, where we can remove a little bit of red tape, where we can even deregulate. So this is the situation where you have low risks for individuals and groups and high public benefits. That's pillar one. Where we have high risks for individuals or groups and low public value, we need to prohibit those practices. Surveillance advertising, those kinds of things, they only create revenue. They have risks for individuals. They have hardly any public value. So rather than making them a bit more ethical, some of them we should just prohibit. And we also need better harm mitigation instruments so that people have help if they experience harm, although no law was broken, for example, which is very, very common, that people suffer harms although no law was broken. And the third pillar is the one that is least developed in our work, is to make sure that where data use, artificial intelligence and data use creates little public value, but a lot of commercial values, more needs to be shared with the communities and people that enabled these technologies in the first place. We've also, you heard me use the term public value a couple of times. This is the last thing I want to show you before I stop. And we have created an online tool that helps to assess public value. This is an early iteration. It's by no means perfect. And it shouldn't be seen as a tick box exercise, but it's supposed to be a structured help to assess the public value of data use. So I will not go into the policy instruments. I will highlight at the very end that the EGE, so I haven't spoken for the EGE so far, but now I will. We published an opinion on democracy in the digital age that contains some of those thoughts, not all of those, but some of those thoughts as well, namely that democratic control over those technologies is important. This is not specific to AI, this is really specific to digital practices. And you can find that on the website. I will conclude that by saying that the problem and solution really start with framing the problem. It doesn't only start with finding solutions for those problems, but whether we frame a particular challenge with regard to an AI technology as a challenge of human control or social justice, it really changes where we look. It changes our analysis, but it also changes the tools that we will use to solve it. So the solutions need to be adequate to the digital age, and they also need to consider the values that we want to promote. I already argued that we cannot transpose, or we shouldn't transpose, the categories and instruments in medical ethics to data ethics and to AI ethics. It happens too much, I think, still. We also need to go beyond the FAT paradigm. I think we need a different sort of underlying data ontology. I haven't talked about this yet, but some people do that already. They think of a different ontology that does away with this dichotomy between personal and non-personal data and so on. I'm heavily drawing on indigenous approaches as well. And we need instruments and practices in AI ethics and data ethics that effectively address power asymmetries and power inequities. Should actually say inequities. I think that's more precise than asymmetries. And democratic control over technologies is the most important thing, because if we have that, we can solve everything else. And democratic control doesn't mean that the state should do it. Sometimes it does mean that the state should do it, but very often it means that people, the demos, have a say over what is developed and how something is used and how the data are used in whatever form and whatever level is appropriate for the particular technology. Okay, I stop here. Thank you.